In this video, we'll take a look at form configuration in a model-driven app. So it's being able to show or hide forms in the form selector, showing or hiding tabs, showing or hiding sections on a form, and showing or hiding columns within a section. All of this is driven by JavaScript, but it's JavaScript that can be configured through front-end records. Okay, let's take a look. Hello and welcome to this video. And this video is the fourth video I'm doing in a series of videos on JavaScript and model-driven apps. But it's JavaScript that can be configured through the front end. And this video is looking at form configurations. So it's the ability to hide or show forms in the form selector, hide or show tabs on a form, hide or show sections on a form, or hide or show columns within a section. And this is driven by JavaScript, but it's JavaScript that can be configured through front-end tables. So normally at this point in the video, I'll show how things work on the end user on the application side, but there's really nothing to see until we start showing or hiding some of these components on the form. But before I get into the configuration records and start doing that, I just want to bring in another user. So for this demonstration, we'll be using another user. I'll be creating the records with the admin user, or creating, sorry, the configuration records with the admin user. But a lot of the demonstration on the end user application side will be through this health and safety officer, or our health and safety officer is Mick Jagger. So when you see the blue browser, that'll be Mick, and then the green browser is the admin user. So that's that. Let's get into the configuration record and take a look at see how they work. So I've just gone into the settings area of my application and into form configurations. So the form configuration records, I have a few active ones here, but I also have a few inactive ones, which I'll use in the demonstration later. So these form configuration records that are currently active are about hiding and showing the prosecution form. So we'll get to that, but let's have a quick run through the actual form itself. So I'll go into one of these records. And first of all, we have, apart from the name, we have the access level, and that's security role, team, or user. So you can set these records up against a security role, a team, or a user. This one is against the user. Therefore, the user lookup is enabled. If it's selected team, then the team lookup would be enabled. If it's selected security role, then the security role would be enabled. And I'll put Nick back in. The table then is the table that you want to run this against. So we're going to be looking at the enforcement action. So it's the enforcement action table. It is the logical name. As I've said repeatedly in other videos, it has to be the logical name at the minute. Once I get these videos recorded, I will go back to the first stuff that I worked on, the user interface rules, and see if I can make display names work for that. But I'm not there yet. So for now, it's the logical name. The component type is then form, tab, section, or column. If you select form, then you just have the form name enabled. If you have the tab, then it's form and tab. If it's section, then it's the form, the tab, and the section. And then column is form, tab, section, column. And then obviously in each of those fields, they're just single lines of text, and you put in the name of the component. The visibility then is show or hide, whether you want the component to be shown or whether you want it to be hidden. So that is the form. There's obviously a bit of validation running on this through JavaScript, but it's mostly just making fields mandatory and unlocked, business required and unlocked, or locked and not business required based on what's selected in drop downs. There's nothing really more interesting going on there. So let's go back to the view. Okay, so we have a record per access level here. So we have a user one for Mick Jagger that says show. We have a security role for the health and safety officer role that says show, and Mick is in the H and S officer security role. And we have a record here for the team for Belfast users, which Mick is also a part of, that says hide. So Mick is basically directly or indirectly part of all three of these. So what wins? So in the settings section then there is a separate setting for form configurations, and it's the priority section. And whatever is the highest priority basically wins. So in this case, Mick is in all three of these, but if the user record wasn't there, then the two records that are there, then the team would win, obviously. But highest priority is user, medium priority is team, and lowest priority is security rule. So that means then that Mick's user record should win in this example. So the user record is show. The team is medium priority, and that's hide, but again, that doesn't count because that one should take priority. So basically, with this setup, Mick should be able to see the prosecution form. So let's go into, we'll bring Mick back in. We'll go into a record here. And well, we'll see. You can see the prosecution form. He's on the prosecution form. So it's available in the form selector. So if I was to take Mick back out, what I'll do now then is I will change the settings. Let's change the settings. And let's say that team needs to win. Now, these are just drop downs, so you can have this, which obviously isn't right, but I don't have any validation on this yet. So let's set it up as team user security rule. So now team should win. So if I save that and go back, then as I say, this team record should win, and not visibility is hide. So if I go back and if I refresh this, just do a Control F5, then that prosecution form is gone. So it's not there anymore. So, and that is one of the things that I've discovered doing this, is that there can be a whole mess of potential conflicts and potential priority questions over as to what wins. I've tried to mitigate it to a certain extent so far, but there's a lot more that really needs to be done with regards to conflicts and priorities with this. But it does work, but it definitely needs tested and probably does need further development. For example, what if, obviously you can be in more than one security rule, what if you have a show for one security rule you're in, but a hide for the other? What wins? At the minute, there's no functionality for that. I think it would just be whatever way the records are read and executed through the JavaScript. So there is more to be done on this, definitely, and it does need testing. But let's put that setting back to the way it was, because I think realistically, if they have a user record in there, that's always going to be the winner. So we'll go user team security rule, save that, and then obviously this record should now win for the prosecution form. And if I Control F5, then that prosecution form is back in the form selector for Mick. Okay, so that is a basic example of how it works, but just using a form. What I'd like to do now in the next demo then is go in and look and show hiding some tabs, showing or hiding some sections, and showing or hiding some columns. Okay, so in this demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, first of all, into inactive form configuration records. And I have a few here that I've set up already. So what I'm going to do is I'll activate each of these in turn, and we'll see the impact that it has on Mick's prosecution form. So if we go into the tab one, so let's start with the tab one, hide legal tab. Okay, and this is the way that the tab one needs to be set up. So the form name goes in, and then the tab name, and it is specifically this name. Okay, so we're in the form editor for the prosecution form, and then the tab, and then it's this name. Okay, so the unique name used for referencing in code. And we're hiding it. So that's it. So that is hasn't been activated yet. And obviously then Mick can still see that because I'm showing by default. So whenever I enable this record, then hopefully Mick will lose access to that tab. So if I activate, and there we go, that's now an active record. So if I refresh Mick's form, then the JavaScript will read these form configuration records, but it's only looking for active records. It should ignore the inactive. Well, it is ignoring the inactive ones. And then that should mean then that Mick should lose access to this legal proceedings tab. So if I refresh the screen, and then the tab disappears. So the tab's gone. If I made that inactive again, then obviously the tab would reappear. But let's go back and let's carry on. Let's hide something else from the form. So let's go with the section. So this time we are going to hide this defendant section. Okay. So into the record. And again, this is how the defendant section needs up. So it's the section name. So similar to the tab, it's this name. Okay, so defendant underscore details, that's what needs to go into the configuration record. And again, we're hiding. So again, if I activate this record, okay, that's active. And then we can obviously see, but if I refresh, then the defendant section, it disappears, and Mick now no longer has access to legal proceedings tab or the defendant section on this form. So that's the section. Let's go back into the final inactive record and activate that. And that then is the column. So this is an example with the column. And we're going to hide the court reference number column from the general details tab. So again, that would be this. So between prosecution type, I spelled prosecution wrong, that's embarrassing. Prosecution type and hearing date, the court reference number should disappear. And again, this is how you set it up for a column name, and this time it's the logical name, like the table is the logical name of the column. Activate that. And yeah, that's there, that's activated. So again, when I refresh my screen, court reference number should disappear, and there it's gone. So that's how those records work. And if I was to deactivate those records again, and then bring Mick back in and do a Control F5, then everything comes back again. So that's how that works. As I said before, this is obviously cherry-picked examples that I know do work. Again, this all needs a good bit of testing, but that's a demonstration of the functionality. What we'll do now is we'll get into the code and we'll take a look at the other half of this, the JavaScript code that makes this work. Okay, so let's take a look at the code that's making this work. So there's two pieces of JavaScript code, one far more interesting than the other. The more interesting one is the one that runs on the end user forms on the application side. So for example, in the prosecution form that we've been looking at, the second piece then runs on the form configuration form for the form configuration records themselves. Not particularly interesting, just makes columns business required and unlocked, or not business required and locked based on the values of choice columns. So let's go into XRM Toolbox and take a look, and I'm in the Web Resources Manager tool. So form configuration is the one that runs on the form configuration form, and as I said, not particularly interesting, just making columns business required and unlocked or locked and not business required. So not going to dwell on that. The more interesting one is the manage form visibility. And this is the code, as I say, that runs on the application side, on the end user forms, for example, prosecution form on the enforcement action table. So starts off with a couple of helper functions. The first one is to get the priority settings. So those are the high, medium, low priorities for user, team, or security role. And I am using a retrieve record call with xrm.web API, and you can use retrieve record if you have the good, and I do have the records good. So that's just that settings record, and bring back the results and set up the priorities. I did a call to that same record in the first video I did for user interface rules. In that one, I didn't use retrieve record, I used retrieve multiple records because I wasn't sensible and didn't use the good. I used a fetch XML query based on the name of that record, so name equal to settings, bring that back. So you can use retrieve multiple records to bring back if you know there's only one record. You can use retrieve multiple records to bring that back if you don't have the good. But as I said, if you do have the good, you can just use retrieve record. Get priority then is another function that's used whenever the configurations get sorted. We'll see that being used shortly. Manage form visibility is the main function in the code. So that's where we're passing in the execution context. We're getting the form context from that, and we're getting the table name from the form context or the entity name, and then we're getting the current user ID from xrm.utility.get global context. Then we call that get priority settings to get those priority settings, and then we set up processed components, which is a crucial bit that helps to track the different components that will be worked with through the JavaScript based on the rules. And then we set up a component types constant. Then moving into the main part of the code, which is then getting the retrieval of the records from form configuration. So those form configuration records. And if you've seen any of the other videos, you'll know that it's xrm.webapi.retrieve multiple records. So bring me back all the records in form configuration for the table that we're on, for example, enforcement action, where they're active. So that state code equals 0 means bring me back the active records. So that's why I was able to use those inactive records and make them active to make things happen. Then I'm getting the security rules, and then we do a sort of the configuration records that we've pulled back, and that's where that get priority function that we've just looked at gets used to set the priority to 321 based on the priority settings and based on the component type as well. And then once they're in order, then the configuration records are processed in the process configuration function, which is here. And then this process configuration function does a few checks and balances. The first one is then as another function, should skip to hierarchy. And that's if we're already hiding the form, then we don't need to check to hide the tab if that tab's on the form because the form's hidden. Is already processed is a separate and similar check for redundancy, and this is if the component has already been processed, then skip. This is something I probably need to come back to and look at if I update this functionality for, you could have a column on a form in multiple locations. So I think what would happen at the minute is if that column is on multiple locations, then any rules you would have would be ignored. So I think for column names, certainly I would probably need to update this functionality to make sure that all column names are processed so that we're able to hide columns properly, even if they are on multiple places on a form. Then check if the rule applies to the current user, and then when we've done all those checks and balances, then we do apply component visibility, which is how the actual showing or hiding happens. So these are the functions then we've just discussed. So should skip due to hierarchy, again that's to check whether you should skip the rule for the column, the section or the tab based on the parent. The get component identifier then is used and is already processed, and that provides a unique identifier for each of the components. Is already processed, as I said, checks whether the component has already been processed through the rules. Again, as I've said, this is probably something that needs to be updated. And then check the rule applies for the user record, for the team, or for the security rule. And then we apply the component visibility. and each of the different component types has its own function for setting the visibility. So form visibility, tab visibility, section visibility, and column visibility. And then there's the function for form visibility to show or hide the form, the tab, the section, or the column. And then there's a check for the user team membership that I must have bypassed in the code, but that's probably used up. Check rule to play. Yeah, there it is there. So checking for the team configuration, that check user team membership. So that is the code. I appreciate I've went through about 350 lines of code pretty quickly. If there's anything in specific you want to look at or ask me about, please do so. But those are the main parts of the code. Again, as before and as in the next video, I use Claude AI to help me write this, and really it wrote a lot of this. This functionality came together a lot quicker than I thought. It did require a bit of intervention on my part, but most of this just through my prompts and a few screenshots and a few explanations, it was able to put this together pretty quickly without too much input from me. The JavaScript in the previous videos, and indeed the JavaScript in the next video for the in-app notifications, I think I could have written that myself. I would have got there in the end. To be completely honest, I think I would have struggled writing this. I think this is probably, I'm not a pro developer, I'm a consultant who likes to develop, and I think this is probably beyond my ability. But again, that is the strength of AI. With the correct prompts, with a bit of domain knowledge, and a bit of debugging in Chrome, you can do things with AI that you may not have been able to do on your own. Yes, AI, I suppose, is a threat, but I'm trying to see it for the opportunity that it represents. So that is the code. As I say, there could be upgrades to it, definitely, and it definitely needs tested. But okay, so final part of the video then, I want to give a few final thoughts and then we'll wrap up. So that was the form configuration functionality. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks very much for watching. If you do have any comments or feedback, please do let me know. Just before I go though, there is one thing I want to highlight that I probably should have mentioned already by now, and that's to say that your users need to have read access to these records. So for example, our user Mick, to be able to process this rules, he needs to have access to the rules and also those settings sections as well. So it is only read-only access, but they do need to have access to that. So for example, form configuration for the HNS officer security rule that Mick is a part of has read access to those form configuration rules and should have read access to the settings as well, to that settings table. So they need to be able to read those records, and indeed that's true of everything that we'll look at in this video series. It's just because this one happens to use a user who isn't my admin user, I've sort of remembered that's maybe obvious, but I thought it was worth mentioning that they will be able to need to read those form configuration records. So as I say, that's it for form configuration. Please do let me know any feedback, any questions, any queries if you have any. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed me in the next video when we'll look at in-app notifications. But until then, cheers. Good luck.